Good evening, everybody. My name is Patrick Rushell. I'm a project manager at the Pearl Mussel project. I'm delighted to welcome you all to this evening's webinar that we're hosting along with the Carbon Connects team from Limerick Institute of Technology. I'm delighted or very pleased to see such a great attendance this evening. Just so you're aware, all of the attendees here tonight, they're active farmers in the Pearl Mussel project. We sent out the invite to all of our farmers, and I think we got more than 80 farmers registered to attend. So I think that shows that there is a significant level of interest amongst the farming community on this issue of peatland management and peatland rewetting. I think you're all familiar with our own project, as we've met most of you at various meetings and training events with us over the last couple of years. The purpose of this evening's webinar is just to open the discussion, I suppose, on the future management of peatlands that are in agricultural use. In my own field of environmental science, we've long recognised the ecological importance of peatlands in relation to biodiversity, flora, fauna, also in relation to water, with regards to water retention and even water treatment or improvements in water quality, and also climate benefits. But I think their value in regulating climate has really only grabbed mainstream attention in the last couple of years. And I suppose that's no surprise considering the emphasis on the climate crisis or climate emergency that we're all in at the moment. We often hear the importance of woodland and planting trees and the importance of that in relation to combating climate change. But to put the importance of peatlands into context, if you can imagine 15 centimetre depth of peat, which is very shallow considering the depth of peat throughout the areas we're working in, if you consider 15 centimetre depth of peat contains more carbon per hectare than a tropical rainforest. If you just think about that for a minute. And also, peatland only covers about 3% of the world's area, but they do store twice the amount of carbon of all standing forests. So I think that just emphasises the importance of peatlands in this whole climate regulation and their status with regards to regulating climate and in combating climate change. I think they have a critical role to play. In relation to rewetting, I suppose what we're talking about here tonight is looking at future management and possibly rewetting of peatlands. I suppose rewetting is kind of an unfortunate term, as it does lead to people assuming we're talking about flooding or inundation of peatlands, but we're not. We're actually more talking about reactivating them or redampening them, perhaps might be a better term, where we're talking about bringing the water table up nearer the surface. Just on the slide here, you can see that there's a peatland here in Donegal that was used for turbary in the past. And the drains, previous to us actually blocking the drains, you can see there the water table within that bog might have been maybe 40 or 50 centimetres below the surface. And then what we did with the farmers, the farmer bought into it and he was keen to rewet his peatland on the basis that his Pearl Mussel payment would go up because we pay for better quality peatland. So it went from this degraded site to a rewetted site, and you can see here, this is what we're trying to achieve, bringing the water table up towards the surface. It's not, the surface would certainly be softer, and we're aiming to make it wetter throughout the year so that you get this sphagnum growth occurring at the surface. And when you get sphagnum at the surface, that means there's peat accumulation or carbon accumulation. So that's what we're trying to achieve. But you can see that the surface of the peatland can still be used by grazing stock. The farmer still has grazing sheep out there. And in fact, they can use those crossing points in the drains, which is, I suppose, an unforeseen benefit that the farmer sees in it now, that even with these little peat dams, they do have these crossing points that facilitate them. I suppose it doesn't always involve hydrological intervention or putting in blocking drains or raising water tables directly, but indirectly, just by changing stock management, you can reactivate the peatland or have it function better. As you can see here in the slide, this is an area in County Mayo in a Burdurha catchment where it's been suffering from serious grazing pressure in the past. And just by managing the stock better there, or reducing the amount of stock at particular times of the years, we can get, or time of the year, we can get the peat surface to re-establish the vegetation. And this has the effect of slowing the water flow being released across the surface. And also you stop that sediment and everything else getting down to the watercourse, which is obviously important for our project where we're looking at water quality. But certainly it's functioning much better now as a natural peatland, and you get that, again, carbon accumulation because the surface living moss layer is accumulating carbon or peat. So, I mean, it doesn't always involve drain blocking or direct rewetting as such, but just by changing stock management, you can improve the quality of your peatland. I suppose to think about the peatland issue in relation to our catchments, I think it's important to note that from scoring all of your farms over the last few years, we know that about half the land you're farming can be classed as peatland. So that's about 16,000 hectares of peatland is what's participating in the Pearl Mussel programme. And a further 40%, or is probably about 10,000 hectares, is actually heath or grassland on peat soils. So they're very, very abundant throughout our catchments. And throughout the rest of the west of Ireland as well, in fact. If we just look at the peatland area that we're working with, we know that more than half of it is in very good condition with very high scores. So on our habitat quality scorecards, these peatlands are achieving 8 out of 10, 9 out of 10, or 10 out of 10. So they're in good quality. And because they're in good quality, they get the highest payment from us for delivering the various environmental benefits that we're interested in delivering, including water quality, climate, and biodiversity. But I suppose I suppose just to reiterate that more than half of the peatlands that we're looking at, about 8,000 hectares, are in very good condition. But then on the flip side of that means that nearly half of that peatland is also in suboptimal condition. Maybe due to past drainage or excessive grazing, like we've seen there in the previous slides, or possibly burning pressure also could cause a peatland to be in lower condition. And these areas are actually a source of carbon, or they're treated as an emitter of carbon. So if you think of it like that, they're emitting carbon the whole time. So these are the problem areas, I suppose, that we'd like to address. And in these areas, we're hoping to improve through the incentives that we have in the Pearl Mussel project, where you get a higher payment for your higher scores. So these peatlands will be scoring anything from a 0 up to a 7. And then, so they're capable of improving. And we want to try and get them all up scoring an 8, 9 and 10 to the higher payment level, where they'd no longer be emitting carbon as such, or we don't think they would anyway. I suppose the benefits of us collaborating with the Carbon Connects project was to gain a better understanding of how our scoring system corresponds with the carbon balance of peatlands, and to help us maybe quantify the carbon benefits of rehabilitating degraded peatlands. So this could prove very useful, I suppose, in the further development of our programme to ensure that we're adequately rewarding farmers for contributing towards combating climate change. So just the various graphs there show the extent of peatland in our catchments, but also the proportion of that which is in good quality or lower quality scores. I think a key message we'd like to put across in any future reward scheme is that it needs to be results driven. And it's very important to reward good historical management, those that have been managing their peatlands well in the past, rather than only incentivising improvements where past management has resulted in degraded peatlands, which aren't currently delivering. So we want to make sure that that isn't the route that's taken, that you're almost rewarding the polluter. We have to reward those that have managed their peatlands well in the past and are actually delivering more currently than those peatlands that need to be improved. So the incentive scheme can't only be there for those that need to improve. So without any further delay, I suppose I'd like to just introduce our first speaker. We'll hear from Henry O'Donnell. Henry is a farmer and agricultural consultant based in Inishowen in Donegal. In the last few years, he's been running the Inishowen Uplands EIP project. And he's here tonight to give us an overview of all the innovation they've been trialling on that project. Henry is also an active member of the Irish Natura Hill Farmers Association, and he'll also share his views on the future direction of peatland rewetting. So I hope you enjoyed the evening. We've got a few other great speakers coming up after that who I'll introduce individually. So over to you now, Henry. Thank you.
Yeah, sorry about that. Hopefully we're on schedule here now. I hope my computer doesn't do the same as yours, Patrick. We seem to be going a bit slow here, but no. Well, thank you, Patrick. As I say, we'll start from there. It seems to have jumped. As Patrick said, I'm a farmer here in Inishowen, up in the very northwest corner of Donegal here. I'm also project manager of the Inishowen Uplands EIP. So what I want to do tonight is give you a brief outline of what we're up to here in the Inishowen Uplands EIP. Now, you'll see as we go through, only some of the measures we're at here in our project are actually related to the uplands and peatlands. We have taken a whole farm approach here, and very much the ethos of our project is how can we improve the financial sustainability and returns from farming, as well as delivering on all our demands from the EU and our own government for what our payments are actually for. So very simply, our European Innovation Partnership project, you can break it down very simply. We have 5 measures in the project. One, we have introduced cattle back onto the uplands. 2 is we have introduced agroforestry onto the farm. 3, we have started to use diverse clover swards on our farms, and we are establishing red clover on farms for silage and fodder conservation. And on every one of our participant farms, we're creating ponds. Now, at the moment, we have roughly 20 farmer participants scattered over Inishowen that are participating in our project. So some of the farmers are doing all of the measures, and some of them are just doing some of them, depending on their own circumstances. That's just a picture of the few of some of the cattle we're using on the uplands. Those are Galloway cattle. We're not specifying exactly what breeds we're saying to use. We're experimenting. We're weighing all the cattle when we introduce them to the uplands, and we're weighing them when we take them off. A few basic principles why we're actually doing this. It has already been well established that mixed grazing is beneficial for all animals, and that carries through on uplands as well. From a farmer's perspective, there's a very simple thing here. We're increasing a cattle farmer's grazing platform, because many farmers in Inishowen have uplands and peatlands and commonage that they've only grazed with sheep. So here we have a new platform for their cattle. We're not saying that we're going to replace sheep with cattle. We're saying that one complements the other. And in some cases, we have seen that we can actually increase the number of sheep on the uplands to manage it properly, along with the cattle. Because the cattle are non-selective grazers, they remove a lot of millennia and dead grass, and then the sheep thrive very well on the new sward that comes back. It's already established that we're improving the biodiversity on the uplands by introducing cattle. I would add, in a managed way. We're at low stocking rates. The cattle are managed and observed to make sure that they're not damaging any habitats or wet areas. We have potential there where we can temporarily fence them out of any area that we would have issues with. I suppose back to why we're doing this. We're ensuring that these lands are kept eligible for payments because there's agricultural activity and they're grazed. Now, Inishowen wouldn't be the worst, but there's some areas that have become undergrazed due to the destocking of sheep, and the reality is that sheep will not thrive or stay on them. So the thinking is that the cattle will improve them, and then the sheep will follow on afterwards. And as I said at the start, we see an opportunity for a free grazing platform for spring, summer, autumn, where there's absolutely no cost to the farmer in maintaining these animals, and he can use his lowlands for preserving fodder, etc., while this is going on. To go on to our agroforestry measure, There is an agroforestry measure, you may say, already. The reality is we looked at this and no farmers in the Northwest had ever applied to it. Very simply, we see issues with the current agroforestry scheme as it stands, and that is that their objective is to end up with a forest. Our objective is different. We want to end up with loads of trees on a functioning livestock farm, and there's huge benefits to farmers to go down this road. We can extend the grazing season, we can provide shelter, we can prevent disease spread, we can capture nutrients, we can improve water infiltration and water quality, we can reduce the need for housing, and we can increase biodiversity. And very topical for tonight, we can increase carbon sequestration. And all the while integrating agroforestry onto a livestock farm, not replacing livestock. And the other key thing that we found on agroforestry is the land that we plant in trees for whatever purpose remains eligible for all farmer payments. And we feel that's critical if we really want farmers to engage in agroforestry and engage in measures that will improve carbon storage and sequestration on farms. That's one of our more conventional plots there. We have a demo farm that in normal times I would love to invite everybody up to see. So hopefully that will become a reality again in the near future. Some of our participants, we sort of adopted a KT model because agroforestry is such a new concept to farmers, and we found farmers didn't really understand it until they were standing there, the usual thing, leaning over a fence, where you can actually explain to them what we're trying to do. Briefly, our white clover based diverse swards, some people call them herbal lays and a few other terms. Basically, what we're doing is looking for a productive sward that suits lower intensity farming and replaces the need for nitrogen artificial fertilizer. The clovers are the drivers in this sward. They provide the fix the nitrogen for the herbs and the grasses that's in the mix. Huge benefits for farmers here in diverse swards. The obvious one is reducing nitrogen fertilizer use and costs. Big benefits for soil drainage because all this diversity of plants all have different rooting structures and make use of all the soil underneath the grass, where perennial ryegrass, which everybody has been using, really only uses the top 40 millimeter of soil. These mixtures are deep rooting. They produce very high quality forage, which will compete favorably with the returns from perennial ryegrass. There's huge health benefits, and there's also huge implications, again, relevant to tonight, about storing carbon in the soil. So ticks a huge amount of boxes and returns financially for the farmer as well. Red clover, which is actually red clover and grasses. Again, the red clover is the driver that can fix up to 200 kilos of nitrogen per hectare and produce a high protein silage crop that will replace the need to feed concentrates over the winter time to finishing animals because the red clover is 16% protein. So very, very high value feed and high productivity, permanently cut. We hope that our participants will cut 2 and hopefully 3 cuts of red clover silage per year, and in a very cheap way as well, because again, there's no nitrogen fertilizer use here. That's the benefits. I'm mindful of time here. The last measure we have on our farms is ponds. All our participants have created ponds on their farm. Now, I'm not even going to start on all the benefits for biodiversity of ponds. It's very widely accepted. It's something that farmers don't know anything about and we're a bit wary of at the start. But the reality is there's a place for ponds on all farms. There's huge implications going forward here relating to flood mitigation and the management of water courses on the farm. There's huge potential here for farmers to be active to do measures on their farm that can actually prevent flooding in catchments. And the science is there to say that flood mitigation measures, which are the likes of ponds, managing waterways, agroforestry, or diverse swards, if those measures are carried out in the upper reaches of a catchment, it's been proven that the flood mitigation benefits cost something like 10% of what hard engineering in the lowlands cost. So I can see in the future farmers being paid by local authorities to carry out some of the actions in our project in the upper reaches of catchment to prevent flooding in the lower areas. So it's really a 1-1 for everybody. Again, the benefits are very clear. Just a wee synopsis, we've 25 farmers initially doing these measures. We're doing a lot of measurements because we feel that there's learning here for new environmental schemes, for eco schemes, for generally everything to do with farming, that there's a lot of sustainable activity going on in our project here that could be adopted, I would hope, on many of the farms of the farmers viewing this tonight. So I will hope that we'll influence policy going forward for sustainable farming. Again, a picture of our workshops, which have had to end with COVID, but we're hoping to get going in an outdoor setting again. A few conclusions. We found the EIP approach with local input working very well, and farmers are very enthusiastic and have a great buy-in because they believe that they have an input onto the design of this scheme. There's huge potential here for climate mitigation on farms with the right innovation adapted, and farmers will engage when they're consulted in the right way, which is important for what we're going to talk about now. And we can deliver environmental and climate objectives that don't have to be a cost for a farmer and can simply be adopting new practices on the farm which work for the farmer and the environment. Now, for our topic tonight, I just want to briefly, in the last couple of minutes here, give you some perspective, possibly as well from a farmer and an Irish Natura and Hill Farmers Association perspective. This whole area of carbon sequestration and rewetting, it's very new to all farmers. Like 5 years ago, the farming community had no concept that peatlands were actually a source of emissions. Now, while we accept the science, and science always moves on, we just worry that this has really come to the forefront. And what we're concerned is that other areas of agriculture that also have lots of emissions can't be ignored. And if we're to deal with emissions and climate change mitigation, all farmers in Ireland have a role to play. And it's not just going to be the farmers that have wetlands and peatlands. And a few of our concerns would be, we feel that activity on our peatlands and wetlands, it can't replace farming. It can't replace farm families in these areas and these land types. Farmers have to be helped along to adjust to deliver on climate mitigation and rewetting and carbon sequestration. But we need help and encouragement. And we have managed this landscape for generations, and I sincerely hope we'll continue to do so. And we have to be integral to all this policy. There is potential there for new and modified agricultural activity. The word you'll hear in the future now is politiculture, which is basically farming wetlands. Now, I would contend we have been doing an element of this for generations. We just didn't have that fancy name for it. But we have to look and we have to get innovative. But the key is that we have to keep farming these lands and modify our activity so that we can sequester carbon. We can rewet this land. Now, you'll hear a lot about rewetting. The key thing as a farmer, I feel, is that there's degrees of rewetting, and we can't have the degree of rewetting that stops all activity by farmers. Farmers have to be engaged with to find a happy medium, if you like. Of course, we can re-wet suitable areas, and we can re-wet them to a level that there still can be politiculture, or there can be some form of modified livestock grazing, maybe at a lower intensity. But it has to maintain that this is agricultural land with agricultural activity on it. And as I touched on earlier, I would feel, and I and HFA feel very strongly, that our carbon storage potential and our carbon sequestration potential cannot be measured on a national basis just to offset activity in other extremely intensive areas with huge emissions. And if we go down that road, the very least we can ask for is that we be paid for our carbon sequestration and storage if it's going to be used to offset other activity. Now, I would feel very strongly, as I said, all farmers have a role to play here, and it cannot be that we're the sacrificial lamb, if you pardon the pun, to massage our emissions figures on a national basis. To touch on some of the more technical stuff, there's a new Gaec2 regulation in the next CAP strategic plan. This is a new standard for farmers to attain that have wetlands and peatlands. Now, we have concerns around this because there's no information on what that standard is. So I think I've given you a flavour of where we feel the standard is. It should be attainable by farmers. And there's also talk that there's already a derogation built into this, that if farmers can't reach this Gaec2 standard, that they will still get their payments. Now, we've had very, very poor experience of the derogations available to farmers with Natura land. There's been very, very small amount of compensation actually paid through the derogation, and we have found it hasn't actually worked. So that's just touching on some of the areas. I'm going to finish up there, but I would say in the future, farmers really have to engage with us. It's something we can deliver if common sense is built in to the activity. And it's people like Patrick and myself and the other upland EIPs that are dealing with upland farmers on a daily basis that need to be consulted to make sure that it's simple, understandable measures that we can introduce onto farms, that we're not trying to replace farms or farmers, and that this is simply, hopefully on the positive side, a new income stream from farmers. So we have to engage and try and make sense of this in the future. So thank you very much, Patrick.
Brilliant, Henry. Thanks very much. Certainly thought-provoking, and I think it's great that we're getting the views of the farming community out there and what their concerns are. I think you've certainly put them across there quite well. I tell you, next up, we'll just move on. Maybe actually, I think there's one question there for you, Henry. So far, we might as well look at it now. It's from Martin. I think it's about whether the cattle are outwintered on the hill, and if they are is supplementary feeding required?
Well, maybe just to explain a wee bit, we carry out ecological studies on the uplands where the cattle are going, both before the cattle were introduced, during and after. Now, I would say generally the cattle are not kept on the uplands in the winter time, because it's just simply too wet. Yeah. Now, generally, most farmers, it depends on the breed. There's some farmers house for a period. There's some farmers with Galloways, and they find, including myself, that they really don't like being inside. And again, complementary to our agroforestry, we can see in the long term, if we have areas that we plant in agroforestry, these would be potential areas to outwinter cattle. And it's a new term for everybody here tonight, I would think, is a green barn, which is basically a sheltered, dry area with lots of trees on it. And we would see in the long term that we would use these for cattle for certain periods. But to answer the question, some of them are, I would say that most of them are housed for a short period. Some of them would be taken to the lowlands, maybe to dry areas, or we have a couple of farmers that have sort of existing green barns with mature trees that they would use to put that cattle in that area for the late winter, and then introduce them back out maybe onto the lowlands in the spring, early spring, and then back to the uplands then sort of late spring, and hopefully they can stay there to the autumn. So we really don't want to damage our uplands, so we are very careful about it, and we're developing protocols for measuring it as we go along as well.
Okay. Perfect. We might just move on along. I'm conscious of the time as well. Niall, you're up next. So it's Niall O'Bulacán. Niall is currently a researcher at NUI Galway. He has a very interesting background, having worked in IT for many years and having spent more than 10 years in local and national government. His many years' experience in policy development, and of particular relevance to this evening's topic, Niall is on the Irish team on the EU INTERREG Care Peat project, which I understand is kind of a sister project to the Carbon Connects. It's INTERREG as well, and it's working in innovative ways of restoring peatlands and looking at carbon savings. So Niall, I'll hand over to you, and thanks very much.
Great. Can you hear me okay? Hello?
Yeah, we can hear you now.
Perfect.
You can hear me. And can you see the slides okay?
Yeah, they're perfect. Can see them.
Okay, we'll plow ahead anyway. So this is my talk, and that's a picture of myself, and that's as Paddy said, the INTERREG project. It covers the same countries as Sea Connect. We have 9 partners in the Care Peat project, and I'm in charge of the policy side of it. So what I'm talking about tonight, I'll try and be as brief as possible, is an overview of global and EU peatland policies, including financial support mechanisms, an update on Ireland's peatland activity, and work underway to assess the key policy gaps. So an overview of the global and EU peatland policies. I'll lash through these because some of them are just, it's just a matter of flagging them. I don't need to go into them in detail. We can leave that open to questions. So my background, I was elected as a senator into Leinster House a few years ago, basically on the agricultural panel. So I had a background in agriculture, but I'm afraid to say it's not as a farmer. I'm not, I loved Henry's talk, but I know a lot about farmers. I grew up in Carlow, grew up in sort of farmland. In fact, I grew up in just a stone's throw away from the Agricultural Institute in Carlow, but basically my background would be more in the dairy industry. So I would have been working in the dairy industry and the technical side of things. So I'm now lecturing in NUIG, and I'm a researcher in NUIG. So just on the background of rewetting bogs, and rewetting, just to be very clear, rewetting does, some farmers have got the idea now because of the Bord na Móna stuff that rewetting means flooding. Rewetting is far from flooding. In fact, rewetting generally prevents flooding rather than causes it. So, you know, just to be clear, allowing bogs to soak up the excess water is a good thing, not a bad thing from the point of view of neighbouring farms or in general. But I mean, obviously we have to look at things on a case-by-case basis. But it can save up to 5% of global carbon emissions, which when you think about it is absolutely huge. So as Paddy said, I think 1/3 of all soil carbon is stored in peatland, an area which covers only 3% of the global land area. And degraded peatland unfortunately contributes up to 5% of global greenhouse gas emissions, which is an enormous amount. But rewetting can massively reduce this. So just to put that in context, if you look at degraded peatlands, as I said, it's 5% of global carbon emissions. Whereas if you look at shipping and aviation, people talk about airplanes, they talk about carbon footprints. They actually contribute about 2% of global emissions for direct flights. I mean, obviously the airports and everything contribute more, but at the moment they're probably contributing a good bit less because there's not so many planes flying. But in comparison, peatlands contribute a huge amount of global emissions, degraded peatlands. And as I think it was Paddy said again, just to put it in context, this is a table showing the sort of relative carbon storage effects of the different land types. And basically, peatlands, they actually cover they store about 4 times as much carbon as an equivalent hectare of tropical rainforest on average. So, and twice as much as the next best carbon sequestration, which is the giant coniferous forest. So those giant redwoods only store about half as much carbon as peatland. And when farmers think about it, just think about it a little bit, this actually makes peatlands incredibly valuable to the planet right now, because this is a very big issue. So think about that. I mean, in the past, peatlands have been seen as poor land, as bad land, as land which isn't useful to have. It's not pasture land. It's not in the Golden Vale. It's actually potentially very valuable land coming into the future. So just remember that. Just looking at global carbon stocks, as you see, Ireland has a significant amount. In fact, 1/5 of our country, roughly, about 21% of the country, is in fact peatland area. So just we'll lash through a few of these policies, but some of the policies which are relevant to peatlands, and they are having an impact on our national policies. They are having an impact on what happens and what will happen in the future. So United Nations Convention to Combat Desertification, the most relevant part of that policy to Ireland is indeed to do with peatlands. The Paris Agreement, many people will be familiar about, hugely important in terms of peatland, and the Irish government very much recognises that. We have various sustainable development goals. United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, again, are extremely relevant to peatlands globally. The UN Decade of Ecosystem Restoration started on the 1st of January 2021. And again, there's a lot of money, there's a lot of policy, there's a lot of effort going into this. People will be familiar with the Green Deal, which is worth, the European Green Deal, which is worth €1 trillion in total. For farmers to access some of that, it certainly, farms are going to have to go in the direction of ecosystem restoration and not exploitation. So the Ramsar Convention on Wetlands is an international treaty that provides a framework for sustainable use of wetlands and the resources. Global Peatlands Initiative. A lot of these are, hot off the press. They're fairly new. They're very topical. And in Europe, the various different policies which affect it would be things like the Water Framework Directive, the Farm to Fork policy, obviously the Common Agricultural Policy. We're going to hear a huge amount about the European Green Deal coming down the line, the 2030 Framework on Climate and Energy, and of course, everybody will be familiar with Natura 2000. That obviously affects protected peatlands particularly. So along with I think it's about 18 other countries in Europe, there's about 18 peatland countries, or 18 countries which have 99% of the peatlands in the EU. And we put in some, universities and knowledge institutes, nature organizations, farming organizations, scientific organizations, and so on, put in big submissions to the Common Agricultural Policy. Sorry, just go back one section. On reducing agricultural greenhouse gas emissions was a key goal, providing a better deal for farmers, and that is important because I'm not just saying that here, but we really do feel that there has to be a better deal for farmers in the Common Agricultural Policy, not a consistent deal or not a worse deal. It has to be a better deal for farmers in order for farmers to change what they're doing in future. And you've already heard Henry's views on this, and Henry's views are very consistent with the views that certainly the paper in particular. So that's a map showing the distribution across Europe of the peatlands in the total country areas. And as you see, Ireland has a lot of peatland. This is a map showing the emissions, and we're not as bad as Germany, a lot of our peatland isn't bad. I mean, as Henry said, there's a lot of farmers have been doing pretty good stuff over the years with peatland. Ours is not nearly as bad as the likes of the Netherlands, where they've pretty much destroyed all their peatland over the years. Or in eastern part of Germany, for example, at the moment, there's a lot of very sort of, I suppose, badly drained peatland, which isn't very usable. And it's going to be pretty useless land over the next number of years because it's been absolutely farmed to death, really. So we talked to various people, including Mairead McGuinness. We talked to Norbert Linz, who's the head of the Agricultural Committee. We talked to a lot of the senior people in Europe. We were in touch with Ursula von der Leyen. We just corresponded with her. We didn't meet her, and various other people at a senior level in the European Union. So the primary goals of the position paper were, guaranteed eligibility of farmed wet peatlands for cap payments. Those discussions are ongoing. We talked about the future, now not this cap, but in the future phasing out cap payments for drained peatlands. That's not an immediate thing, but the Commission very much believes that drained peatlands will have to, they won't be able to get payments in the future. When that is very much open to negotiation. And the third thing, very much backing up the sort of work that Paddy and others are doing, which is the establishment of results-based agricultural payment schemes, paying for ecosystem service provision as low greenhouse gas emissions from peatlands. So just to show the potential of what can be done from a greenhouse gas point of view, and greenhouse gases are very important to the European Commission. They're very important to the world probably as well. So roughly 25% of the total agricultural emissions in the European Union can be basically achieved by rewetting about 3% of the agricultural land. And when you think about that, that's quite an extraordinary thing. Now in Ireland, it's obviously a considerably greater figure than that. There's some countries which there's not a huge contribution. For example, France, there's a little bit of peatland there, but not very much. So the position paper sought to encourage poluticulture. That is the word that Henry mentioned there earlier. Poluticulture is, we've been asked to put in to the European Commission a definition of poluticulture. And you'll see that on, you could look it up in Wikipedia if you like, we've got it there. And it's been supplied to the European Commission. So it's basically farmed wet peatland. So we're talking about encouraging also carbon farming. And what carbon farming is about is keeping carbon in the ground. But you can also grow, as Henry said, you can actually farm products on the land so long as there isn't carbon escaping from it. So that does mean that the land has to be wet. And as he said, there are degrees of wet. And this all needs to be very carefully managed. As you see, many of these pictures, there's cows in the background, there's things being planted. It's not a case that agriculture has to cease. It just has to be done perhaps slightly differently to the way it's being done at the moment. So just to show very quickly, he referred to the Gaec2, which is a good agricultural and environmental condition 2. First of all, the Commission put forward a proposal, appropriate protection of wetlands and peatlands. The Parliament changed it to effective protection of wetlands and appropriate maintenance of peatlands, whatever that means. And then, the Council changed it to minimum protection of wetlands and peatlands at the latest by 2025. So they basically kicked it to touch. Now that's all gone back into the mix and it's all basically being discussed again. But the NGOs and the science proposal is effective protection of wetlands and peatlands. But it's how that is implemented is the important thing. It's not about, it's not about the wording necessarily. It's about how it's implemented in the various different member states. So just to show, we've put also a white paper along with CConnex, this project. We've put, we're sending a white paper to the European Commission. That's due to be published in the autumn of this year. But this is sort of the framework for carbon and blue credits. And basically getting money for keeping carbon in the ground or for indeed rewetting peatland In countries like the Netherlands and Germany, they've managed to get basically 70 and 80 euros a ton for keeping peatland in the ground. Peatland can store up to 30 tons, or sorry, it can emit up to 30 tons per annum. So, the highest figure I think was about 1,100 euros per annum for a hectare of peatland was the revenue from those. But just to be clear, there can be other, revenues on the same land. So 1,100 euros per hectare is probably pretty good compared to sheep farming. But if it also encompasses sheep farming, or indeed some cattle or whatever, or some poluticulture, it can be extremely valuable. So sphagnum farming, again, people will be familiar with stripping peat moss from the. Sorry, you better mind my time now. I could go on all night, so I'll be finished in a few minutes. But sphagnum farming is a much better way of dealing with things. The technology in that is improving enormously at the moment, and it's much better than stripping peat moss as we do at the moment, because it's sustainable, and it can provide a similar amount of fertilizer, for garden centers or whatever. But if it's done in a sustainable way, it can be farming, and there can be a product every year, as opposed to just ripping off the top and just leaving it bare, So again, there can be revenues. We're looking at revenues in relation to co-location with renewable energy. This has to be done sensitively from an agricultural point of view, and from a wildlife point of view, from a land point of view. So again, there needs to be a lot of work done in that respect. And of course, turf cutting, we're looking at the whole issue of turf cutting. What we're looking at is not about abolishing necessarily private turf cutting, but it certainly is about managing the whole situation. Certainly, we do want to see an end, and indeed there is an end to the big, huge agricultural exploitation from the point of view of burning turf in power stations. It's a very inefficient way of generating electricity. So an update quickly on Ireland's peatland issues. As you see, Ireland is the worst in terms of peat bogs lost in the last number of years by far. So the total for Europe is 444 hectares. We've contributed 407 of that. Partly that's because we actually have the bogs, whereas other people have already destroyed them. So let's not get too negative about our own country. But there is a lot of environmental destruction. A landslide. I'd encourage anybody to look at the Mean Bog landslide on YouTube. It's absolutely horrific what happened there. And this is just through sheer negligence, really. And I hope there's nobody involved in that here. But really, honestly, it's abhorrent to see what's been done in some wind farms. Just bad management, to be honest. So we're actually doing a lot of scientific work on Clon Bog, which is a 26-hectare site with the National Parks and Wildlife Service, Bord-na-Móna and others, to measure carbon and to re-wet and restore the bog in a, I suppose, a scientific way. We've also contributed a lot of information to the government in relation to the National Peatlands Strategy, and we've done some work with many different scientific organizations just to show the level of carbon. So just to be clear on this, roughly, I'm going to say here now that roughly 1/6, 1/7 of all carbon emitted in Ireland every year is emitted from degraded peatland. So just to be clear on that, it's massive. It's really, really, really big. So you can dress it up any way you like. There's a lot of carbon goes out of our peatlands and into the atmosphere. And I mean, I think what did we say? It's equivalent of 4 African bull elephants a minute or something like that, which is absolutely atrocious when you think about it. So you're all aware of the Bord-na-Móna situation. The government has approved funding, keeping 350 jobs in the Midlands, basically rehabilitating the peatlands. Some of them have been utterly devastated over the years. This picture is a nice picture, but some of the bogs are pretty dreadful. So there's a lot of work underway to assess the policy gaps. The 3 main gaps that we've identified are the lack of a national carbon credits framework for peatlands. In the UK, they have a thing called the peatland code. In other countries, they've developed other frameworks. The national carbon market has been developed in the Netherlands, for example. But there's a gap in education in terms of peatland or policy on peatland education. So again, there's a lot of great things about peatland that not many people know, and I'm not going to claim to know them all. I keep learning things every day. But also facilitating local landowners in terms of rewetting and doing it in a productive, positive way is definitely the way to go. So the main barriers are financial incentives. I mean, I've talked to many farmers, and I'd be really interested to hear your opinions. And most farmers have said to me that if there's very good long-term financial incentives for basically rewetting and restoring peatlands, that they'd certainly be interested in talking about them, because it's a case you can't expect farmers to farm for free or to do work for free. Absolutely nutty idea. So there has to be proper incentives put in place to make to ask anybody to change what they're doing at the moment. So there's a lack of awareness about the benefits from rewetted peatlands. That goes for everybody. I'm not talking about farmers. In fact, farmers probably know far more than anybody else. But there is a lack of awareness in the general population about the benefits from rewetted peatlands. And there's a lack of awareness and information about alternative income sources from peatlands. So the three things that are currently in place, there's a growing community engagement and leadership. We've heard from Henry there. We've heard from other farmers. Many other farmers are actually leading the way in regard to the whole rewetting program. The work of community-based organizations is certainly a huge plus. The Community Wetlands Forum and Wetlands International, many other groups, the National Peatland Conservation Council and so on. Development of agricultural schemes aimed at rewetting farmland on peatland is another enabler which is in place, and obviously the Pearl Mussel scheme is a great example of that. So that's it, basically. I hope I didn't give you too much. I don't know if there's one or two questions in the chat, but I'll hand over to Paddy now, and I hope that was of some benefit.
Oh, that was great, Niall. Thanks very much. Yeah. There's no.
Great, Niall.
I don't think there's anything straight away in the chat there at the moment, Niall, but we might come back to questions maybe at the end just to get through the presentations. So I might just let Amay drive on there with his presentation. Just to introduce Amay. Amay is from the Carbon Connects team. He's a researcher in Limerick Institute of Technology Research and Development Unit. Working on the Carbon Connects project for the past 2 years. Also from the Carbon Connects team, delighted to be here as well, is Seamus Hoyne. Seamus is a mechanical engineer and previous head of development at LIT and has worked in renewable energy for over 20 years. So great that Seamus is here as well. And also Tuin, I hope I'm pronouncing your name right, Tuin Smith. Tuin is a professor in Radboud University, Nijmegen in the Netherlands. And he's lead investigator of the Carbon Connects project and professor of sustainable water management. So I'll let, I think Amay is going to present the Carbon Connects work. The work that they were doing was on one of our farmers' peatland areas over in Oughterard in County Galway, where they've done a bit of an area of rewetting just to demonstrate the potential carbon benefits from this kind of work. So Amay, I'll hand over to you. You've got the mic.
Yeah, can you all hear me and see my screen?
Yeah, it's perfect there, Amay, yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Patrick, for the great introduction, and thank you all for coming. So I'll quickly begin. I'm Amay. I work on the EU INTERREG Carbon Connects Peatland project. We are the Irish partners of the Carbon Connects Peatland project here. So today's presentation, very briefly, I will go through what the EU Carbon Connects project is doing, the goals and objectives, obviously, of the Carbon Connects project. I'll talk about our collaborative work with the private landowner and the freshwater Pearl Mussel project on a blanket bog or a blanket peatland near the city of Galway. And I'll conclude my presentation by introducing a computer tool, or let's say a computer model, which was developed by lead partners of the Carbon Connects at VHL Netherlands. This tool basically quantifies the greenhouse gas emissions on your peatlands, on your drained and rewetted peatlands. So we are the EU Carbon Connects project. Our major goal of the EU Carbon Connects project is obviously reducing the high carbon footprint of the drained peatlands. And we are based in the northwestern part of the Europe. Netherlands is our lead partners. We have UK, Ireland, Belgium, and France. And we all are working towards our common goal, as we all have pilot sites. So on our pilot sites, we are demonstrating the carbon sequestration potential of the rewetted peatlands by having sustainable bio-based business models. And paludiculture is one of the business model, as Niall had talked about earlier. And the goal of having these sustainable bio-based business models is to provide some kind of financial incentive or an income source to landowners and farmers who have these kind of peatlands. And we are also working in tandem with the Care Peat project on the policy work and the white paper, which Niall had discussed earlier on. And there is a very detailed Carbon Connects website, and we continue to update our activities of all the EU partners on the website. So please have a look at it later on. We all have pilot sites, as I said. Netherlands has got a quite lot of pilot sites. They do paludiculture on that. The UK site, they are working with the sphagnum inoculation. We have the Irish pilot site with the pearl mussel. We have 2 pilot sites in Belgium and 1 in France, and we have added 1 more in France now. So we are all working towards together on a common goal. One of our project partners had put up a short video on the Carbon Connects. This video is about 1 minute, 50 seconds, and this will give you more insight on peatlands and the Carbon Connects and the paludiculture. So I hope you enjoy this video. I'll just put the video on.
Did you know that 3% of the world's land surface is covered by peatlands? Peatlands are concentrations of wetland filled with organic plant remains, naturally accumulated over centuries to be a wetland habitat. Today, some peatlands are drained to be used for grazing, crop production, forestry, or recreation. The thing is that this peatland drainage significantly increases emissions and increases the risk of flooding due to changes in land subsidence. Globally, the European Union is the second largest emitter of greenhouse gases from drained peatlands. We emit 15% of the global peatland emissions. Draining peatlands occur in almost all EU member states, and they often contribute to more than 25% of their total emissions from agriculture and land use. What if there was a way to solve drainage problems while maintaining production on the land? The solution is paludiculture, wet agriculture and forestry. It involves harvesting wet crops for food, fodder, fiber and fuel. By promoting sustainable wet agriculture, the project Carbon Connects aims to reduce CO2 emissions by 50% in mismanaged agricultural peatlands in Northwest Europe. To make this possible, we will introduce new bio-based business models based on raising water levels, introducing new crops, isolating carbon in land outputs, and carbon credit schemes. The impact we are aiming for is to create sustainable businesses, reduce CO2 emissions, create local innovative ecosystems, to make Northwest Europe more resilient to climate change.
I hope you all have enjoyed this short video put by one of our project partners of the Carbon Connects. I'll just quickly go over, we are Irish partners. We are hosted in the development unit of the Limerick Institute of Technology. We work on climate action, but we do work on other projects as well. And our climate action team comprises of the CCC, the Climate Adaptation Project, and the Carbon Connects, which you are hearing about. So we'll go quickly to the Irish pilot site. We are working on a blanket bog in collaboration with Patrick and his team at the Pearl Mussel project and the IT Sligo and the private landowner. Our pilot site is located from the city of the Galway, and it's located in the Ovenriff River catchment, which is a pearl mussel habitat. Our pilot site is about 9 to 10 hectares. It's a drained bog, blanket bog, which was cut over earlier. The depth of the peat is around 2 meters in our bog site. The vegetation is mainly consists of a mosaic or a combination of bare peat and ling heather and cotton grass and soft rush, so a mix of vegetation and the bare peat. So what we are doing at the pilot site is we are trying to quantify what is the carbon sequestration of this drained peatland and the rewetted peatland. So the way we are going about quantifying this is we are measuring number of environmental parameters. So we are measuring through the environmental parameters. We are obviously rainfall is a big parameter. We have the sensors to measure the groundwater, where is groundwater in the bog. We are taking samples from the bog to look at the carbon is stored in the bog and the carbon in the water, in the groundwater. So we began monitoring on this bog in mid of May 2020, and our monitoring went up till November 2020, mid of November. In the mid of November, the private landowner, the Pearl Mussel and the Carbon Connects, identified the points where we can block the drains and, rewet the bog. And this is the drain blocking that we did with great help and cooperation of the landowner. We are extremely grateful to him for this. And so we did this, and we did this around on a couple of days, on 10th and 11th of November to be precise. And after the drain blocking was done, we had quite a good amount of rainfall after the drain blocking. And you can see the picture on the top right-hand side. And this is just a demonstration picture to show we are looking at, our groundwater wells basically in the bog. And this is a fantastic photo taken by the landowner. That's a drone taken from a drone to identify the, the drain blocking points. And importantly, we block the drains, and we'll be monitoring this, the post-rewetting period from mid-November 2020 to until the end of December 2021. So this can give us a picture of how much carbon has been sequestered in the drained condition and in the rewetted condition. So how do we quantify this? These are the environmental benefits of quantification. So, our lead partners came up with this computer-based tool, or it's kind of like an Excel-based software, which we can call as site emissions tool. And the important thing we want to know is, does the rewetting decrease the greenhouse gas emissions? Well, let's take an example to demonstrate this tool. For example, the two important things that you would need to work with this tool is the where is your groundwater table, what kind of vegetation you have on the bog. And this tool will quantify what is your greenhouse gas emissions in the drained condition and in the rewetted condition. So I just took an example. So, for example, my peatland is in Galway, Ireland. I have a 50 hectares of peatland. My peat thickness is 2 meters, or let's say 200 centimeter. I started rewetting in 2020. And the water table in the drained condition in a typical Western Ireland peatland is, let's say, 40 centimeters below the peat surface. I just have moist bare peat, I have a and the local farmer or landowner rewetted his peatland, and now the water table is at 11 centimeters below the peat surface. And the vegetation that started to appear on his bog is small sedges with sphagnum mosses, or very different, different kind of mosses. Let's see what this tool says. Now, in the drained condition, in the groundwater table depth 40 centimeters below peat surface and the vegetation moist bare peat, the model is saying that the global warming potential, which is the combination of three big greenhouse gases, methane, carbon dioxide, and nitrous oxide, is 570 tons of carbon dioxide equivalent for 50 hectares. So that much is the global warming potential in the drained condition. That is almost like 11 tons of carbon dioxide for 1 hectare or per hectare. Now, after rewetting, what has happened is the bog is started to store carbon, or the bog is gaining the carbon. And my global warming potential has reduced from 570 to 255 for 50 hectares, which is 5 tons per hectare. So just by rewetting and not by flooding, as what Niall said, 50% reduction in your total global warming potential. So that's a huge number. Just by rewetting and not flooding your peatland, you're reducing 50% of the global warming potential. And another important characteristic which this tool gives you is, if the farmer doesn't do anything and he allows his peatland to be in a drained condition, then still that peatland would be there for 610 years until all the carbon in the peatland has been emitted as CO2. But if the farmer or the landowner carries the rewetting measures, then he increases the life of his peatland by 4 times. The peatland will still be there for future generations, around like 2000 years. So just by simple rewetting, you are increasing the life of your peatland, you're decreasing your greenhouse gas emissions by 50%. This is just an example to show how big the potential is, in a drained condition for greenhouse gases, and what rewetting does. It reduces almost half of the global warming emissions from your bog. So with this short presentation, I'll conclude my talk. Would thank all the people here, mainly the Paul Mussel and the private landowner who allowed us to work on his site, and the EU INTERREG and the development unit. And big thanks to Mark O'Connor. I think he's the main guy responsible for having this instrumentation on the site. So thank you all for this, and if there are any questions, would be happy to talk about it.
Excellent. Thanks, Amay. Look, that's great. I'm conscious we're a little bit over time, but we're not too bad. It's just 8:10. So if we'd like to hold you maybe just about another 10 minutes, if that's okay. Amay, we might just leave questions till the end. I think to reiterate what Amay said there, the private landowner there, John O'Sullivan, is a farmer in the Pearl Mussel project, and look, he's been a massive support. And I mean, I'd say he looked at us like we had 2 heads when we first approached him about being involved in the project. But in fairness, John has been fantastic and very supportive, and he's he just very, very much acknowledged his foresight to be involved in the project. So I tell you, we just move on. We've got a small feedback session. It's just we'd like to get the attitude of the farmers towards this whole drive towards rewetting or changing management of peat soils. So Mary McAndrew there, who's part of our team, who most of the farmers here will have met before. Mary, you're there, are you? Can you come in?
Yeah, I'm here.
So Mary's our techie person for this evening. She's the only one that can get her head around the technology. So she's going to put up a survey there on the screen, and we'd like you all just to answer the questions. Hopefully this works. She's going to put the link into the chat. So if you can if Mary posts the link into the chat and we click on it, you'll see a questionnaire will appear in front of you. And if you can tick on the answers, I think there's about 10, maybe 11 questions, usually multiple choice. If you can just tick on the answers, and at the end of that, then we'll be able to just show the results of the responses. It's all anonymous, of course, but I think it'll just maybe lead to a bit of interesting discussion.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, so we have we don't need to dwell on this.
No, it's not surprising. Yeah.
Yep. So, okay. We have, so mainly variety between sheep and mixed livestock. A few people have forestry, and there's a couple of people with organic farming as well. So again, kind of what we would expect in our catchments.
Yeah.
Majority of people have peatland on their farmland.
Mhm.
So again, there's 25 to 50% peatland left on most farmlands. Some people have 50 to 100%, and there's a few people not sure of the percentage of peatland that's left on their farm, which is fine. So the current status of your peatland. So yeah, that's probably kind of what we would expect based on our scorecards, Paddy, as well. The majority partially drained, just a few that are highly intact and not drained, and we have a few somewhat drained as well. So yeah, similar again.
Yeah.
A little bit of peat cutting, and the majority are grazing stock on their peatlands. A little bit of forestry, and some have no activity.
Yeah.
So some people, the majority of people are somewhat aware that they can rewetted peatlands could potentially provide an income source. Some people had no awareness, a few people were very much aware of it, and some not sure. So again, interesting results. Okay, which of the following do you think is potential providing income on rewetted peatlands? So the majority of people felt that rewetted peatlands providing water quality and biodiversity would be a potential income.
Potential, yeah.
Okay, that's interesting. Okay, so majority of people again would like to explore rewetting peatlands with help from with guidance and support. Okay. And the majority of people would like a rewetting incentive plus regular incentives for carbon sequestration, water quality and biodiversity. A few people would only want an incentive for rewetting. So the main difficulties is lack of rewetting knowledge and the need for financial support, and adjacent land flooding. So again, that's kind of probably what we would expect, is the lack of kind of awareness of what is involved with rewetting and the fear of flooding of adjacent land. So hopefully some of the things you've heard here this evening will actually help with some of those concerns. And the majority of you agree that farmers who have undrained peatland, intact peatland, should be financially rewarded for the benefits they're providing. Nobody disagreed with that statement, which is great. 24 people would be interested in partaking in an anonymous survey in the future for you. And then lastly, any comments you would like to make on the future management of peatlands. Couple would be like to be able to continue farming my rewetted peatlands, need good support and good advice, more information. Agricultural activity must be protected in a future scheme, and farmers need to be involved in the policy and regulatory development.
Okay.
So that's interesting results.
Yeah.
Okay, so I think I can.
Yeah. Consideration for aquadiversity. Yeah, very good.
Thanks, Mary.
That's great. I might just ask Seamus. I think Seamus Sign would like to say a few words from Carbon Connects and from LIT.
Great, thanks very much, Paddy. Just a quick few words, really. I suppose that firstly, say those survey results are really interesting, and I think it clearly shows an interest from farmers in exploring more and addressing one of the gaps that Niall spoke about, that and Henry mentioned, that there's a capacity building and a knowledge sharing needed to support farmers in making decisions in this space. I think it's really important that we mobilize resources to help farmers make decisions. I think clearly both Henry and Niall, and I think we would strongly agree with the sentiments and the work also from the Pearl Mussel project, is that farmers need to be part of the conversation about framing the policy and discussing how we can put the right incentives in place that allow for the carbon sequestration to be maximised, but also for farming and farm life to continue. And I think lots of things are happening across Europe, and Niall clearly showed the numbers that show how important it is to use peatlands in terms of the climate agenda and taking climate action. But we are all learning. I mean, the analysis that MA has shows that the impact is very big, but we need to balance that with, and I thought it was really interesting that the farmers showed that the incentives, the majority of farmers on this call showed that the incentives which address carbon but also biodiversity and water quality were of the highest interest, which is great to see that they acknowledge the interrelationship between all of these things. But I suppose on behalf of the Carbon Connects project and on behalf of LIT, I suppose to pay a big vote of thanks to everybody in the Pearl Mussel project, Paddy and the team, and also, as Paddy had mentioned, John O'Sullivan, who's been very supportive in terms of a farmer engaging with us, looking at what we're trying to achieve overall in the project. And ultimately, the Carbon Connects project is one part of the overall system, and LIT is very keen to support the continued research and development. And being an academic institution, you know, we're interested in the research, but then translating that into education and training, so we want to convert the research into real world supports for farmers at the end of the day. So thanks very much, Paddy.
Very good. Thanks, Seamus. Just any other questions there? I think I may already answer the question there in the questions and answers. So anyone like to come in or anything? I'd be happy to let anyone ask a question if they want to come in. John, do you want to come in there? I can I'll just throw the microphone on and see if you want to say if we're.
Yes, thank you, Paddy. Yes, thank you. It was great to witness this webcast. Really, very good presentations. Very, enlightening. And I really perceive now farmers more, I think, than as landscape managers. They are just not people making an earning from products from the land, but they really are managing the landscape in a climate robust way. And I think that what I also learned is that the farmers, they are aware of that, but they need some help from, I think, the academia, from science to do that. That was also one of the results in the Mentimeter, one of the questionnaires. And I think there's a great responsibility, I think, not only for Carbon Connects, but also for Care Peat and the other European projects which are working on this issue. So we should help the farmers to manage their peatland in a correct way, and also reward them in a good way for that. And so it was very interesting webcast for me. I learned a lot. Thank you. And I would like to continue a more bilateral discussion with the farmers, not only through this kind of media, but so hopefully COVID will disappear soon so we can visit each other. That would be really great. Thank you, Paddy.
Sure, yeah. That's great. I think John O'Sullivan might have his hand raised. Mary, I don't know, are you able to give people control to let someone speak if John wants to say something? I think he's got his hand raised.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have unmuted him there. John, you should be able to.
Yeah, I think I can speak okay now.
Yeah.
Hi, John.
Yeah, hi. I just want to say that the presentations were very informative and gave a great perspective in terms of, I suppose, the extent of the problem and also the possible opportunity for landowners and for society and so on. And it's great to see such strong alignment also between the organisations presenting tonight, the Mussel project and Carbon Connects, and how that aligns with the farmers' feedback. So just based on that, does anybody have any idea how the next steps are developed, or how a roadmap is developed to start bringing these ideas, which are great, to, I suppose, policy stage, to regulatory stage, and I suppose something that's going to give farmers an opportunity to actively engage in the shorter term, because this is something that could take a long time. It could take a decade unless it's managed very, I suppose, proactively and so on. So just wondering if you have any thoughts on that.
Yeah, I wonder, Niall, would you be well placed maybe to expand on that a bit as to how you see the policy developing and implementation?
Well, I mean, you know, this is like predicting the weather, really. How do you see the policies developing? I think there's a big push on at a European level and at an Irish level to look at certainly. It's hard to say, you know, whether the support for farmers in places like the west of Ireland is going to happen in practice, because there's, you know, I know that the farming community and farming thinking is very much divided, but I think at the end of the day, land, you know, peatland is very valuable from the futuristic point of view, and I think it's important that farmers really, you know, appreciate that and stand up for themselves, particularly in the west of Ireland part and the peatland parts of Ireland, because, you know, obviously the really good land from the old way of thinking is very much you know, in the east of Ireland, for example. And I know that the whole sort of dairy, there's a lot of sort of discussions between beef and dairy and so on, but what's actually happening is peatlands and the value of them, the potential value of them, is throwing the cat among the pigeons a bit, because it's I suppose it's disrupting the whole way of thinking, traditional way of thinking. So the Department of Agriculture and the Department of Environment are having to think again about where the priorities are in terms of funding. So I think really I'd urge farmers, you know, who are involved in peatland to stick to their guns, to look, you know, to work together to modernise and to understand that their land actually is a lot more valuable than it was a few years ago. So I as usual with an academic sort of background, you know, we don't totally answer the question. We're saying, look, we don't know, but predicting the future, really, it's up to people, and it's up to cooperation, and it's up to us all really to work together to look for a better future, because I mean, it's only by working together that we're going to shape the future in a positive way for everybody.
I was interested to see the information you had. It was you that presented, Niall, about in the Netherlands where the potential payments there were accruing above €1,000 per hectare. Was that just on a kind of a pilot project basis, or is it more a widespread scheme than that? Or
no, in Germany it got up to about it got up to 1,100 roughly on a pilot scheme basis, but in the Netherlands that's part of their new national carbon market. Now they've got a slightly different, you have to be careful because they've got a slightly different way of doing things in the Netherlands, in the sense that all their land is very much flooded, and, you know, it's polders, a lot of it's below water, you know, sea level, and they manage it really very, very tightly. So it's kind of different to the way we manage our land, you know, but nevertheless, you know, they have found, and the UK is beginning to find a framework for providing, I suppose the Peatland Code is looking to provide better income for farmers in peatland areas. And I think we just need a similar thing in Ireland. I think obviously a better one is what we need, you know, but I think we need to work together to do that. And the Irish government definitely recognises the need for that. They have recently very clearly indicated that they do recognise the need for this.
Okay.
Just maybe to add to that, to answer your question, John. Well, I suppose from a farmer's perspective, farmers are currently in an interim period in the CAP, and really our next CAP strategic plan, which Ireland has quite a bit of leeway for the first time ever to design. I think from a farmer perspective, we're going to be farming under whatever regulation is set up in the next CAP strategic plan, formulated by the Irish Department of Agriculture. And I think the onus is on them to develop policy that will encourage some of this activity. I think it has to be incentivized. I think farmers with this land need to be recognised, and the land needs to be recognised, as Niall says, how important it is in the scheme of things at the moment, and that we need a combination of things. We need more research, we need trials, we probably need people like Paddy experimenting with bits of it. It probably needs more EIPs to try this out in practice, to see what works for farmers, for environmentalists, for water quality, to try and come up. At the end of the day, this is going to have to be a sensible measure that a farmer can take up, and that he's incentivized to do so. And that model needs to be developed as soon as possible, or otherwise our peatlands are going to continue to emit, and they're going to continue to be degraded. So somebody really needs to take the bull by the horns here and formulate agricultural policy that's going to encourage this. So I think that's the way forward.
Yeah.
Thanks, Henry. Thanks, Niall. And I suppose the question will be at the moment, you know, there was some great presentations tonight that showed, I suppose, the clearly set out the situation and the potential, but like, are the IFA or the INHFA or some other organisation actively lobbying the Department of Agriculture right now for farmers in the west of Ireland and so on, to, let's say, highlight the opportunity for the country and also for the farmers, and try and drive this into policy and CAP? Because I suppose unless it's been pushed now, it may be another, I don't know, 3 to 4 years before it actually does officially get recognised in the CAP and acted upon.
Well, I suppose to answer that, I can speak for INHFA. I can't speak for IFA. We're very deeply involved in trying to determine exactly where this is going as regards EU policy and indeed Irish policy. And we're lobbying very strongly at home and abroad to make sure that this doesn't turn into a stick to beat farmers that have this land with, because what we cannot have, and what we can actually see to an extent, is that this is just an exercise in offsetting. We have this carbon asset, we can add to this asset, but the purpose of doing that, is it to protect the environment, or is it to offset against other unsustainable practices elsewhere? This is our huge concern, and we just have a fear that the agribusiness, industrial agriculture lobby is extremely strong here, and anything that gets in the way of this intensive production model could be in danger. And as I say, we can't be sacrificed to keep everything else going on. As Niall says, we potentially have a huge asset here. Well, like everybody else with an asset, we want to be get in line for whatever rewards is there for having that asset. So that would be central to what INHFA are trying to do here, that we don't mind protecting peatlands and wetlands. We've protected by and large for generations, and we're quite happy to continue to do so if we're recognised for it. And it has to be said that some of the degradation of these lands by farmers is as a direct response to very flawed agricultural policy in the past. And we need to be careful going forward that we don't have more flawed policy that upsets the balance of things and prevents the potential of so much good work that could be done here.
Yeah, I think that's interesting. I suppose one of the best ways you described it to me in the past was you don't want to be seen to be facilitating non-sustainable agriculture elsewhere in Ireland or whatever, that everyone needs to pull their weight here in environmental sustainability, and it shouldn't be up to the ye to be doing everything in the West and those elsewhere driving on, continuing to pollute or to degrade environmental.
I think.
Sorry, Niall. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to say I couldn't agree more with Henry. You know, I think there's always a danger. We've seen this, you know, at the moment, for example, we've stopped moss peat production in Ireland because it's not a very good idea just scraping the top off moss peat and leaving the land pretty much destroyed and selling it in garden centres in Europe. So we've kind of stopped that, and now we're beginning to see in our shops moss peat coming in from places like Finland and Lithuania, which is absolutely nutty. You know, so what we're doing is we're just moving the problem around. And I think that's what Henry is talking about. You know, there's no point, you know, I suppose farmers in the west of Ireland, for example, or the peatland areas doing a great job in terms of carbon, only to see it sort of wasted away by unsustainable practices in another part. And, you know, I think all farmers will be familiar with the whole thing about the Mercosur agreement, the idea that, you know, we can stop production in Europe, whereas just still keep, you know, basically bringing in meat from other countries, and indeed chopping down rainforests in order to facilitate cows in Brazil in order to sell them in Ireland, because it doesn't help the planet. It only helps, I suppose, Ireland improve its numbers, and it helps Europe improve its numbers. But at the same time, it's actually causing more damage in another sphere. So you have to get the balance right, and that's where policy comes in. And it's also very important that as Henry said, farmers stick to their guns. They stick to the fact that they need a good deal out of it, because in an ideal situation, good policy means that everybody wins, not that some people win and other people lose. So I would strongly support what Henry's saying there.
Okay, I think we might close it down, guys. It's 10 to 9. I'm conscious we're after keeping everyone here half an hour over. And May, I think, is going to say a couple of words, but I know there's one question there from Martin, maybe about Teagasc, because the whether they're involved in this research. I know Teagasc are working in the area of climate and trying to figure out ways of I think they're doing a lot on the measurement side of things and that, but I'm not clear to what level they're involved in it, or if anyone else wants to say anything about that. But yeah, I think that's pretty much it. Do you want to say something there, May, and we might close it down then?
Yeah, first of all, thank you. Want to say thank you to Patrick and Mary for putting in a lot of efforts, and Tuan as well for his feedback on the questionnaire. And Patrick and Mary, thank you for the wonderful cooperation, and John O'Sullivan as well. And Niall, I have seen a few of his presentations now, and I like his presentations he does well. So Niall, Henry, Patrick, John, I think thank you all, and thank you to all farmers for actually coming. But because without you, you know, we wouldn't have been able to do anything. And thank you for your feedback. Hopefully, we can take this feedback forward in a very positive way. That's all I can say at the moment. So thank you very much. Thank you all.
Okay, thanks, May. All right, look, ourselves, thanks very much, Henry and Niall, our guest speakers. Very, very enlightening talks. Great addition. And that's it. We'll be in touch, I guess. Thanks, everyone.
Yeah, I guess this presentation is available on the YouTube. I think, Paddy, we should probably let them know this so they can watch it later if they have to.
Yeah, we'll put a link out there. We'll post it on social media, and we'll let our farmers know that there's a link up there. Yeah.
Yeah.
And, we might circulate the presentations if it's okay with the guys. We'll talk to you about that.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you.
Bye.
Yeah. Bye.